So, when you think post-secondary transition, we want you to think of these keywords: individual, unique, exploratory. And what do we mean by that? Well, transition for one person can be completely different for the next person. It's an individualized experience. There is a lot of information out there. There's a lot to consider. So it will be a unique experience. Trying to do all of it at once can really feel consuming. As you explore the options that are available to you, using your child's school experiences will help with all the necessary research. You are using available resources at your disposal. That could be a special educator, a general education teacher, school administration, outside agencies, or if it's even supported in your school system, it could be a transition coordinator. But right now, we're here to have a conversation. So welcome. This is the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast. We try to cover the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I am one of the hosts. My name is Patrick Cadigan. I am a special education teacher in the public school system. I do have a co-host, and who would that be?
I am Megan Smallwood, and I'm a public school transition coordinator.
One topic of discussion that comes up frequently in our transition community is self-directed services. It's been mentioned more than a handful of times, so both Megan and I thought that it would be a good idea to have a broad but deeper conversation, opening up the idea to families who may be thinking about this path. We also thought that it would be a good idea to invite Jamie Broadnax along for the conversation. For longtime listeners, you'll remember that Jamie is a coordinator of community service, and we needed her assistance to help us understand what self-direction looks like from her side of the pond. So let's join our regularly scheduled conversation, already in progress. No. Get out.
Big topic.
Oh, wait.
All right. So if we're going to be talking about self-direction, I'm going to give a shout out to our website at www.postsecondarytransition.com with our official definition. Self-directed is a service delivery model for individuals and their support circle who wish to exercise more choice, control, and authority over their supports. It allows greater control over services and staffing, the ability to be creative in use of funding, and the ability to completely individualize days. It promotes personal choice and control over the delivery of services and budget. Now, once again, we have Ms. Broadnax, who is here to help us in this conversation. So, Jamie, you're a coordinator of community service. If you had to define self-direction, if you had to define self-direction for families, what would you say to them?
Honestly, it wouldn't be too far off from the definition that you just provided. The way that I really describe self-direction is by saying that it is a much more individualized way of receiving your DDA services. And it really puts the control back into the hands of the person that is receiving services because, like you just said, it allows them to create a plan that is specific to their needs, their preferences, how they would like their day to go, and really down to the details, scheduling, service hours, staff, what those staff do. Really, there's an endless amount of ways that self-direction can be individualized to the person.
Can I just ask, so how many, as a coordinator, how many do you have on your caseload, Jamie?
Specific to self-direction or in total?
In total, and then how many are actually doing self-direction? I'm just curious, the breakdown.
So right now I have about 34 people on my caseload, but that fluctuates. I've had probably as low as 31 and as high as almost 50 at one point. And self-direction wise, it started that I only had 2 people. And now I would say probably 5 that are active and 5 more that are transitioning.
Oh, wow. So there's definitely an increase.
Oh, for sure. It's the direction that people are moving.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to explain more and more to parents that are exiting, because I know the initial thought, when they hear about self-direction, they're like, well, it's just going to be me. I can't do that. That's a lot. I already have a full-time job.
So I definitely spend time reassuring, individuals and their families that yes, there is more responsibility, but that responsibility is not as overwhelming as it once was. There are so many different tools now that we use to support the families in making these decisions. And as long as you have a good support team and everybody does their role, it's not that much more challenging than using traditional services.
Is it true that once you like get that initial startup, like it's a lot front loaded work. Like once it's set up,
Absolutely.
it's not as, scary, I guess, long term wise. It's just a little tweaking here and there.
Exactly. Once you make those big decisions and you start putting the plan together and all of those pieces really fall in place, you'll see that, moving forward, like I said, there are some responsibilities that you're going to have to address as things go, but the bulk is taken care of right there in the beginning.
And then one of the questions that I was thinking about, because I know that this is something that the three of us have talked about offline, is there still like a challenge around hiring, like finding staff for families who choose self-direction?
I think that there's a challenge in hiring staff for all service models right now. People in traditional services are having just as many difficulties as having, their day programs or the providers that they use for their different services in providing staff. So yes, but I wouldn't say that it's more challenging in either service. The only difference is between whose responsibility that falls on. So obviously in traditional, the hiring falls on the provider, but the individual is still impacted when that provider can't find staff. So in self-direction, yes, that responsibility will fall on the individual and their team, but at the end of the day, it's still the individual that's impacted.
Could it actually be better? Because with the self-direction model, you have more flexibility to change how much you want to pay them as opposed to the traditional that has that set rate.
And that's really one of the selling points of self-directed is being able to offer, what we call a living wage, having someone be able to survive off of this job and also offering them benefits that make them want to keep working. That's not something that all providers are able to do.
Yeah, you see such a big turnover with a lot of the traditional day programs when we go to visit, even with the higher ups, like the admissions director. I know some of the places we go, it's a different person every time we're trying to schedule a tour. So I feel like that can be very telling.
And especially for some individuals who it matters to them to have the same staff or to have, know what to expect when they're receiving their services. If every time they're having to put in the effort to used to a new person, learn how this person does things, that can impact their day.
That's important to families too.
Well, and I'm just thinking about, working with students with autism and how some of them have challenges with transitioning. So yeah, like this introduction of, this constantly revolving door of new people could present challenges.
Another big selling point for self-direction is the ability to use your family and friends, the people who know you best and know how to support your needs and have them be able to be paid to provide that support. It's huge.
I have a couple families that upon exit, they did self-directed the model and they said, well, we already had these people working with our child or young adult prior to, them graduating and they're willing to continue. So now we'll just move into this model where they're being paid. It's just already they had established people that knew their child and, wanted to continue. They had that relationship. So it made it a lot easier.
Well, speaking of being paid, this is something that we have talked about, the three of us have talked about to varying degrees. And I was wondering if you could talk about on our Facebook groups, there has been a lot of discussion around this. There have been challenges with the payment system. Something changed and there's a lot of frustration for families. What is it? What are they talking about?
Specifically, what they're talking about is challenges with the FMS, or now called the FMCS.
All right. So acronym-vomit alert. What is FMS?
Sorry.
FMCS.
FMCS.
Yes, it is the FMCS now, which I have to remind myself daily. But it stands for the Fiscal Management and Counseling Service. And the way that I kind of put that to the families is that is like your payroll department. They are the people who are going to make sure that everybody's checks are right, their taxes are right, all your forms are in, your trainings are up to date, all of those important things that help you stay within compliance as far as, basically running your little business.
So the parent's not responsible for sitting there writing out the paychecks and getting all the tax forms made.
Absolutely not.
But then that's also not something that they can do without. Like they have to have it.
It is mandatory. I think it's pretty well known, but maybe not. Last year, there was a big shift in the FMS agencies that DDA held contracts with. We ended services with one agency, brought on two new ones. So then it became the options were the Arc of Central Chesapeake, GT Independence, and honestly, I forgot the third one, but that third one is no longer providing services in Maryland. So now we just have those two options, which is the Arc of Central Chesapeake and GT Independence. So there's been a lot of back and forth because people signed up to work with one FMS and then were given very short notice to switch. Then on top of that, as the FMS agencies are handling all these new incoming enrollments, they're struggling to keep up with the people that they already had. And it's just caused a lot of delays and unfortunately some missed payments. Through that switch, everything also became online. So before, where families were used to completing paper timesheets and doing a lot more back and forth communication with their support broker and the FMS, now they're using apps and using the computer, which for some is a really great change. For others has been really challenging, and that's causing even more barriers and just making sure that, everything is submitted on time and correct, and that the FMS is then able to issue those paychecks and reimbursements on time.
So with the change in FMCS, it sounds like for those who were already established in self-direction, it was a bigger, I don't want to say blow to everything, but like it was a lot harder than those who are just starting out because they didn't know it's any different.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're brand new, you're coming in, everything is already electronic. You're downloading the apps, the website is up and running. But for the families who have been doing it a different way for years, some of that was a big learning curve.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure.
are they being offered supports to kind of help like guide them through that or?
Yep. So there was optional training that you could reach out to the FMS and request.
Okay, cool.
Both FMS also have videos on YouTube and their websites that you can access that'll walk you through.
Oh, YouTube. Boy, I'm sure that families who struggle with computers are going to love YouTube. Yeah, let's dive into that universe.
You can also reach out to your coordinator and your support brokers for help in learning those as well.
So, opening up the conversation to a broader set of topics, as a coordinator of community service, how would you define the benefits of self-direction?
I think the main benefit is that individualized plan. The individual is given the power to really break down their day moment to moment to determine what they want to do, what service they want to receive, who they want to support them in that moment, how they're paying this person, what sort of benefits that they're giving them, how much time they're spending into the community, just the control really is the main benefit, because when you're using a traditional provider, you do have to give up some of that.
So in this area of control, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier is that it sounds like families can hire friends or other family. And I guess, why would they do that?
There's a lot of different reasons. Just being familiar and comfortable is I think, a big one. Who knows you better than your parents or your friends that you spend time with that, understand your needs. And also, you have a good, solid relationship with already. And a lot of times these people are already doing this work, just not being paid for it.
Right.
Moms, dads, siblings, grandparents, your village, so to speak, they're already doing the work. So why not be able to pay them for everything that they already do?
Yeah, and it helps to have that list of people. So you've got the plan A, the plan B, the plan C, because we all know things happen and you need to have backup.
I'm going to be the cynic, and I'm going to throw it out there. Does
No.
Oh, whatever. Gosh, I'm always being teased, and I don't do anything to deserve it. But what about fraud? As soon as you brought up that people are hiring their friends and family, my first thought went to fraud. Like, is that something that you think that we're going to need to worry about?
I think anytime money is involved, you have to consider that as a possibility. There are always going to be people who try to take advantage or manipulate things in some way. But with, the oversight provided by DDA, the team members that are put in place, such as the FMS, the support broker, the coordinator, everyone is really working together to check each other, make sure that all of the math is correct, make sure the services are happening as planned. So I think that there's always the possibility, but if everyone again does what their job is telling them to do, it should be a very small possibility.
I hate to
Good.
say it, I was probably putting you on the spot, but I seem to remember, and I don't know if it was you that I had the conversation with or if it was someone else, but there, once COVID kind of started to become less of a, I shouldn't even say less of a thing, but just kind of started to slide more into the background. Didn't they discover quite a bit of fraud was actually going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of things that were just not prioritized during COVID as far as regulations were concerned. Just there wasn't the manpower, there wasn't the ability to see people in person. There were just a lot of things that we couldn't do as effectively as we can now that we're back in person. So there was a lot of things that weren't happening necessarily straight with, our expectations. But to my knowledge, all of those things are being worked out.
Is it true? I don't remember where I heard this, somewhere along the lines. Like, I know you can hire family, you can hire friend, or you can hire family, but is it that you also have to have an employee who is not family as part of their self-directed staff, or can it solely be family?
It can solely be family.
Okay. I thought for some reason someone had mentioned that once because I didn't know if that was even like an issue, I guess, for fraud because I have a family who, they have a large extended family and they have a plan to use the family members because they know the young adult very well and they feel comfortable and culturally they like to keep it together, that way. And I didn't know if that was okay.
So, if an individual does elect to have only family members, their support broker will be a non family person.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
So another thing that we were talking about offline earlier, and I wanted to ask you about again, was this day-to-day administrator service. Can you explain? This is something that's new to both Megan and I. Can you explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the day-to-day administrator service is a new service that I believe DDA just started offering on July 1st. It is not funded through a specific DDA service, but instead is funded through the unallocated funds left over in a person's budget after, all of their employee wages and taxes and things like that have been, accounted for. So if the individual has enough money left over to fund this service, it can be provided up to 40 hours per week at a varying wage. DDA provides guidelines to determine the wages that you pay in different services. And the day-to-day administrator, I really look at it as, so to speak, like the mom and dad kind of role. This person is going to be the person that is doing household management tasks. They are scheduling appointments. They are creating, with the assistance of the individual, creating the individual's daily schedule, their employee schedule. They may be doing financial services for the individual, managing their benefits, anything to really just help kind of keep the household and that person's services running smoothly. And, like I said, the things that mom and dad pretty much already do without getting paid for.
So where would they find someone to do this administrative service?
So it could be really anyone. There are no limitations as long as, just the same as any other self-directed employee. They need to be able to pass an in-person CPR first aid training, and they need to be able to pass that national background check that the FMS provides. It could be their parent, it could be just any staff person that they, choose. There's a lot of flexibility, just like with every other service. It can go anywhere from 1 hour a week to 40 hours a week. Um, you can offer benefits in this position. You can offer varying wages. It's really up to the individual to decide how they want to utilize that service.
And it's something that could change. Like if they started like front loaded with a lot of hours, and then as time went on, the parent felt like, well, I can handle this a little more myself. They could decrease the hours for somebody, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, it seems like it's just going back to that notion of individualized control, giving a greater level of control to the families.
Right. I did have a provider question though, and I'm not sure, Jamie, how much you know about this, but like so many families are like, when they think, okay, I'm going to do self-directed, but I want a vendor. I want a vendor with an agency. And I feel like in our county specifically, that's tricky because not all of the
Very.
agencies want a vendor. But I constantly hear from like coordinators who work in other counties like that there's a lot more options out there. But I know something might have changed with the way they were paid to make it easier that they could vendor, but they're just choosing not to. Do you know anything about that?
It's a little bit of all of that. One is that it is hard to find providers who are willing to be vendors for self-direction. And then the providers who do often will only accept a certain number of self-directed people. And then on top of that, it's hard to work a vendor into a budget, especially if a person is trying to use, say, for example, a day provider who for those 40 hours per week. That is going to eat up a lot of money out of the budget because the provider rates are higher than what is being paid typically to staff. So you're losing a lot more money when you're going the provider route. And you're not able to determine how much, the staff make. So you could be paying out a huge portion of your budget and your staff is still getting next to nothing, because that provider can charge whatever they want as long as it's within DDA guidelines.
Good to know. And isn't it like, a lot of times they could, if you want to go only for 2 or 3 days out of the week, like the vendor prefers to have someone who's there 5 days a week. Like for staffing purposes, it makes more sense on their end. But there are other options aside from like a day program that you could use your self-directed funding for, right?
Yeah, for sure. So there are so many different community activities, social groups, and then even providers who are specific to wanting to work with people who are self-directed and cater programs that fit those self-directed schedules. There are providers who offer just, drop-ins. So there's a lot of different options that don't require you going to a provider every single day and spending that 40 hours a week there.
So one other question that I have, and I think we might have touched on this earlier, but I did kind of want to go back to it to get a little bit more information. Nursing support can that be blanketed under self-direction?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Nursing support is determined based off of a person's health assessment score. So any person who receives a 3 or higher on their health assessment is required to have nursing support services added to their plan, traditional or self-directed. The one thing I guess that families don't love about nursing support is that it cannot be a family member that provides it. It has to be a outside person who is also a DDA registered nurse.
So I would imagine that then that would kind of lead us back into challenges with finding people who, who provide that service. Would that be accurate?
Yes and no. So there, we as coordinators receive lists of both support brokers and nurses who are interested in providing those services to people in self-direction. I think the biggest challenge is just finding nurses who are taking on new individuals and then ensuring that they can work with the individual's schedule and that the family and the nurse, are able to develop a good working relationship.
I just know for a lot of my students who have, nursing complexities, self-direction has been a great option for them just because of the routine in general. They are not required to get up and get on a van at 8 a.m. or earlier than 8 a.m. really, and stay at a place all day if they can't handle it because of fatigue, or their medical needs. And also those who actually have a nurse that accompany with them. There's so many providers that, for liability reasons, do not want a private duty nurse attending that's not one of their staff members. So there's just a lot of complications, I know, in general. So that's why self-direction has been a good option for them.
The ability to customize is really what self-direction is all about. And like you said, Megan, for people who do have a higher health need, being able to say, I had a rough night. I'm going to stay home today and my staff can stay here with me. Parents are not left with the responsibility of trying to find, taking off work or finding someone to stay home because their family member feels too ill to go into a day program.
Right.
You're really able to receive the services that you need where you're at. And, that's a big benefit.
Yeah. And I know providers, if you're missing too many days, attendance becomes an issue for them. So you don't have to worry about that because no one's keeping it check on, are they going out? Are they reporting every day? They're doing what works best for them. And that's a meaningful day.
As we're continuing to have this conversation, I kind of want to segue and I want to ask about, so we're talking a lot about the benefits of self-direction, but what about the benefits? What if families wanted to go the more traditional route? What are some of the benefits of actually going with a provider?
I think the biggest benefit that I see is not having to take on the responsibility of scheduling, of, worrying about hiring staff or making sure your staff are going to come that day. When you are going to a provider agency, you have the expectation that that provider is going to provide the oversight that is needed to make sure that whether it's the individual or their family, that the person receiving services is receiving services as it's outlined in their plan. And for the most part, you expect that when that service starts, whether it's going to a day program or moving into a residential home, that from the moment the individual is in the care of that provider, that they are cared for and their needs are being met.
I feel like there's a lot of parents, even though they hear the benefits of self-directed, they just have in their head that it's more of a secure, I don't have to worry about anything. It's taken care of for me. It's one less thing on my plate. And they want a traditional program. And I always tell families it's whatever works best for you and your loved one. So it's your choice, but
Absolutely.
it's just important to hear all of the options and just hear the pros and cons of both sides and hear from others who are living it just so you can make the best decision.
Yeah. It's absolutely not to say that traditional services or self-directed services are better or worse than the other. It's just for some people, they're better. For other people, something else is better. And I think that that's probably why DDA does have the option to choose how you receive your services, because we do want people to be able to have the plan that best suits them.
And then do you think that in terms of being with a provider, are there more opportunities for socialization versus a self-directed model, or does it just depend?
I think it depends, but there absolutely can be more opportunities just because with a traditional provider, especially in those meaningful day services like the day programs or the CDS service, when the individual is attending those, it's in a group setting. Even individuals who receive one-to-one services are still included into the group with their one-to-one supports. So there is that understanding that every day you're going to have an opportunity to socialize, to participate in group activities, and just try out different things that you may not have the ability to try out on your own personal time. Self-direction also has those opportunities. It's just more responsibility on the person and their team to identify those. Where in traditional services, again, that's the provider's responsibility.
So it's almost like giving you a definite place to go.
But with self-direction, I mean, making those connections early on is helpful because I know so many Facebook groups, and we talked about before, have popped up for families on self-direction, trying to make connections with others so they can go out and do social activities and outings together.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I even work with some individuals who have stayed in contact with their peers from school. So now that they're out of school, they still get together sometimes on a weekly or bi-weekly basis just to hang out, go to lunch, do fun things like bowling, other activities, just to keep that social opportunity available. But you're not forced to do it every
Right.
day. It's not a requirement. You can do it as you choose.
Again, which works better for some individuals.
Yeah.
And I seem to remember that one of our offline conversations included, in regards to benefits of the provider model, was continuing education, right? There were opportunities for people to take classes or do job training or things like that.
Totally. So a lot of providers have really great programs set up where an individual can identify things that interest them or things that they think might possibly interest them, but they've never had the chance to try before. There are providers who offer volunteer work. There are providers who have, programs that are just strictly within the day program, things like gardening, food service, learning, to support with secretarial type tasks. There's also day programs who enroll in regular classes, like cooking classes is a huge one. Just about every individual I support who participates in the cooking classes love them. So those are things that the provider puts in place. That really is a benefit of going to their program, knowing that you're going to have access to that activity with peers and the accommodations that you need to participate. But again, with the right team, you can have that in self-direction. It's just, again, the responsibility is put on the team to really identify those opportunities, schedule them, and make sure that the person has the supports they need to participate.
Right. It's not specific to a program. They're available, but you just have to be the advocate and make the effort to find them.
Yeah. Yep. And another thing, kind of touching back on that day to day administrator position, that's something that your day to day administrator can do for you is identify activities, identify, events that are happening in your community, things that your support staff can then take you out and support you in participating in. Also, that unallocated funding can be used to help pay for the cost of certain activities as long as they're justified within the person's plan and the goals that they've set for themselves.
So, looking at it from someone who knows absolutely nothing about this, then how would families find out about these opportunities around like education and or continuing education, job programs, things like that? Where do they go?
There's a lot of places. So always start with your team. So your coordinator, your support broker. Those two people typically have experience supporting others in the community and accessing things that interest them. So talk about your interests. Talk about the things that you want for yourself or, as families, talk about the things that you would like for your loved one. Also, support groups. I know you guys mentioned the online and social media groups. Talk to your loved one's school. They may know of, groups that have been set up by previous students or just community activities specific to our area. The Parks and Recs have a whole list of what they consider therapeutic activities, but it's really activities for people of just differing abilities. We have such great programs too, like the Special Olympics, that really do a great job of bringing people together and creating these groups and really those relationship connections. I think is probably where you're going to find the biggest resources, meeting people, asking them what they do. Just, like anybody else, we meet friends and we talk about different interests and build on our own activities that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think the park and recs in our area is a very untapped resource for many, and it's a gold mine if you look at it and like what they offer. And then
Absolutely.
also the college campuses, I think just exploring what kind of
Mhm.
classes are offered because I know in our surrounding area there are some really good courses or classes being offered, like you'd mentioned cooking, and just a variety of different things that appeal to different interests. So I think it's just
Yeah.
a matter of taking the time, knowing the interests, and doing the research.
I will throw out that as somebody who has worked with Parks and Rec before, from my perspective, I feel like it's a challenge of marketing. I agree with you that there are so many things that are available through that county program, but they just don't do a very good
Mhm.
job of like letting people know.
I think the therapeutic aspect throws people off a little bit because when you're going to look at activities, you will likely click on the link that says activities and sports. But they have chosen to list any sort of varying disability activities under their therapeutic. So it is a little bit more difficult to find. But again, connecting with your support broker and your coordinator, they can really help you identify that. And Doors is another great resource that I know the school system typically starts off, not all the time, but a lot of times as individuals are already transitioning into adult services, they have that connection with Doors. But Doors is able to offer so many different, really great educational and pre-job training, and then even support as you are starting to work in paid employment. So that's a great resource to tap into if you haven't already.
Yeah, and it's totally possible to have your DDA funding and DOORS funding and use both of
Yeah.
them, just not, at the same time.
Yeah, as you move into adult services with that job development, that's exactly what happens. Is Doors coordinates with the meaningful day providers to provide that service. And then as you're moving into being a paid employee and having a secure job, transition into employment services where you have a provider support you as you continue to work.
All right. So, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to sound more intelligent than I really am, that one of the other benefits of having the provider is that you're not necessarily going to, budgetary concerns are not at the forefront, right? They're going to take care of that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the budget really only comes into play in an individual's world when they're in self direction. When you're in traditional services, the funding amounts are there, but it's not going to impact the individual because they're not having to worry about how much their staff are being paid. It's not their responsibility to ensure that the provider is even receiving the funding. All of that happens directly between DDA and the provider.
One topic that comes up, and I am thinking specifically of our discussion with Pam, was transportation. Is transportation covered under the traditional provider model?
It is in some circumstances. So, for typical day program and CDS providers, a lot of them do offer transportation to and from their sites. And then, of course, any sort of outing or community activity during the day, they provide the transportation to and from. But in self direction, there are options that can support a person with their transportation. We are able to request reimbursement funding to cover things like Ubers. You're also able to provide mileage reimbursement to your employees. So, for example, if you have an employee who is supporting you in CDS, any place that they take you during the day, as long as they're tracking that mileage, they can submit it at the end of the pay period and receive reimbursement. And that's built into your budget. That's a decision that we make as we're building the budget.
Because like you mentioned with the budget for self-directed, when they're allocating funds for different categories, that can always be changed later on, right? You're not stuck
Yeah.
to one for the rest of your time with self-direction. If you find that you're not using too much money in one, you can always switch it over to something else where you might need more.
Yep, absolutely. So as long as it is a service that you have already requested and it's already in the plan, we can pretty much freely move money through a process that's called budget modification, where you would contact your support broker and your coordinator, and together, after, especially after reviewing the reports that the FMS submit monthly, to let you know how much money is left over in each of your different categories. You submit that budget modification, and we're able to move money from one service to another. If it is something that is not previously requested in the plan, you do have to complete a PCP revision. to make the funding available within that service. But that's also something that your coordinator can support you with.
How long of a process would a budget modification be? Like, is it a lengthy time that you're waiting, or is it fairly quick?
So for just a budget modification, it's a pretty quick process. You would just contact your coordinator, work out the specifics. The coordinator then would complete the budget modification form, submit that on your behalf, and then the FMS will contact you to let you know once that's been approved. Typically, I would say 48 hours.
Oh, okay.
Of course, it can be a little quicker or it can
Yeah,
take a little longer, depending. But that's the average. Now, if it is to do a PCP revision
that's what I
to
was going to
move
ask
that
next.
can be that can be a much longer process,
Okay.
upwards of 2 months, also give or take a little bit, depending.
I mean, 2 months, still not as terrible as I was expecting, I guess, but.
Yeah.
Okay, once again, acronym-vomit. I don't know what you're talking about. What is PCP?
Oh, sorry,
So
Patrick.
PCP is that's the person-centered plan. And that is the plan that an individual, along with their entire team, creates to determine the outcomes or goals that they're going to be addressing that year, the services that they're going to request to support those outcomes, and then how those services will be implemented to support their needs.
So almost like your replacement IEP after you leave the school system.
Pretty much exactly that.
Do you have any advice? Because I know one of the biggest fears is after exit, moving forward and having your services start. And I've notoriously heard that it does take a little longer for approval with DDA for self-direction to get up and running as opposed to like a traditional day program. Do you have any advice as to how to kind of like speed that up for a self-direction, someone who's doing self-direction upon exit? Is there anything they could do to make it easier, quicker?
Reach out early on to your coordinator, start making those decisions and requesting the information that you need to make those decisions, and ask questions. Don't be afraid. If there's something that you don't understand or something that you want more information on, ask about it, because the more information you have, the better you can do at making those informed choices. And they
Mhm.
don't seem as scary when you have the answers. Um, but the biggest thing to start working on up front is really making the decision. Are you for sure that you want to move into self-direction, or do you want to go traditional? Because once that decision is made, then you can start working on all of the smaller choices, like choosing the FMS agency, connecting with a support broker, and identifying the services that you're going to want to support you.
So getting an idea of what you would want the day to look like early on would be helpful, knowing where in the community or if there was a provider that took like self-directed funding or like one of those agencies that they could access, like getting in touch with them and doing the research. Okay.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And thinking about who you want to work with. If it is going to be a provider or if it's going to be family or friends, talk to them, ensure that they're on board.
Yeah.
Let them know what that might look like, and start considering if you do want to advertise or hire, outwards of your family and friends. Maybe thinking about what that looks like, what you're looking for in an employee, so you start to put that together, because that new hire process also does take some time, and that can be a delay. Even if you have your plan approved, if you don't have staff to provide those services, you're still
Right.
going to be waiting.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about these two different models, one self-direction and then the traditional provider model, if there was something that you were going to pass on to families like this, that there's a significant difference, what would one of those things be?
From my perspective, I think the biggest difference is having control of what you do during the day. If you're in self-direction, you can really make that be almost anything. If you are choosing to go with a provider, they are going to be primarily in control of what opportunities are offered. You, of course, are in control of whether you participate, but the opportunities that you have will differ based off of what the provider chooses to present to the group that day, or if you're in self-direction, based off what you choose that you want to participate in that day.
And then one of the notes that I have is live-in provider.
So, a big thing for individuals who are interested in self-direction is having to understand that there is not currently a community living option under the self-directed model. If an individual needs to live in a provider-owned residence, they need to be in traditional services. That may change at some point in the future, but right now, that is where we're at.
But that doesn't mean that they can't have some form of housing outside of the parent home if they were on self-directed.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different housing options that are available to people in self-direction. Of course, independent housing, if you are financially able to live independently, live with a roommate, whatever you choose, you can receive services in any home. There's also the option to receive housing support services, which assist an individual in potentially applying for a housing voucher, a rental subsidy voucher, or another government-based home situation. There's also a service called supported living, which basically can provide up to round-the-clock support and staff for a person who is living in a privately owned setting. It really is just that provider-owned home that you would require traditional services to access.
So with all of that, with all of the information that we've just talked about, all of the stuff that we've shared, does it ever become overwhelming? My thinking is, do you forget more than you remember?
It depends on the day. But really, I feel like I go through it so often that sometimes I just am able to say it and I just know it, but forget to, kind of how you've helped us today, Patrick, forget to break it down and make sure that it's completely understandable. Because if I'm just sitting here and saying FMS and support broker and DDA and day-to-day administrator, a person is going to look at me and not have any clue what I'm talking about. So a big part of it is learning to take the official statements and kind of simplify them and make sure that every person that I'm working with, whether it's individual receiving services or anybody else on their team, completely understands, what is being said and what their options are. Some days I have no clue.
That's me, Patrick Cadigan, special educator. I'm there for the families, man.
We're appreciative.
All right, Miss Megan, you got anything else that you can think of in the short term?
I think Jamie covered it all. That was wonderful. And I think that's the point. I think it really helps for the parents to be able to go back and hear it over and over and over and understand, like we said, it's not as scary as you think. It really is possible. You're not alone in it. You have that team of support, so use them.
Yeah. And I really kind of push that heavily when I do see that there's a family who's really interested in self-direction. And I too, based off of what they've told me, feel that self-direction is probably going to be a better option for them. Just reminding them, you are not going to be alone. This is not going to be your only full-time job. We are a team in this, and all of us are going to do a part to make sure that it runs smoothly. Those first couple months where we're doing all the decision making and making the budget and going through the schedules, it can seem like a lot. And I warn people, you're probably going to be tired of talking to me after this process is done. But once it's done, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
We never have to go through this entire process again. It's just little tweaks here and there as we go on to make sure that the person's needs are met.
Yeah, and it's so nice that they have you to help them with that, because I feel like as a transition specialist, I'm giving the initial information and kind of like, motivating to do it, but then I drop off and I'm like, I'm not there to see it through. So hopefully it all falls into place. So I'm glad that they have you.
Thank you. And I really encourage people to reach out to their team, because it still surprises me sometimes when I meet with families and they have these questions, or sometimes they have this misinformation.
Yeah.
And it's just because they were never comfortable asking.
Yeah.
So they've gotten things off the internet, or they've gotten things from social media groups that weren't always 100% accurate.
Right.
And it scared them more.
Right. I agree.
Ask questions.
And I know that and I just had a conversation with a parent about this, about traditional day programs. You don't know what's going on in other people's minds, or, what their perspectives are and how they may differ from yours. And you have to take everything that you hear from others with a grain of salt and make your own, decisions about things, because it is good to get feedback from others, but at the same time, you need to really think about you and your loved one, and would this work for you, even though someone else said, oh, this is horrible, or this is, very hard. Like, step back for a minute and just think about you and your loved ones.
Yeah, completely.
Once again, you've really helped us out, and
Yes.
Happy to help.
We appreciate you coming out and talking with us about all this stuff.
Yes, definitely.